Good morning, Mrs. Rashid. You're going to be asked questions by Miss Graham, whom you've met. If you want a break at any time, you can let me know. Would you raise your hand now and say the words of the oath after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Thank you. Good morning, Mrs. Rashid.
Morning.
I'm going to be asking you some questions, and I just want to ask you, first of all, if you would mind telling us your full name.
Saadia Rashid.
Thank you. What age are you?
I'm 39.
Now, we have all your contact details already in the inquiry, so I don't need you to say those out loud. You're the sister of Said, is that correct?
Zahid?
Zahid.
Yes.
Sorry. You'll see that blue folder in front of you, and please feel free to open it up. You've very kindly given us an inquiry statement, and you signed it yesterday on all the pages, didn't you?
Yes.
Do you see in that folder there should be a hard copy of that statement that you'll have had a chance to look at and revise or change as you wished? Is that the copy that you see in front of you?
Yes.
Thank you. So you feel free at any time today when I'm going through the questions to look at that copy. If I'm referring to a particular paragraph, it'll also come up on the screen in front of you, but you might prefer to look at the hard copy. And I'm going to take you through it just page by page, and we'll go through it slowly. All right.
Okay.
We'll bring that up on the screen, please, your inquiry statement, SBPI 00260. And you'll see on the front page it says your name, Mrs. Rashid. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it was taken by the inquiry team on Friday the 13th of January this year. And then if we look at the very last page, and you can look at your copy, on the very last page we'll see that you signed it the 7th of February at 3:56. And
Yes.
you've signed every single page of that inquiry statement. And that was by a system called DocuSign. And you'll have to say yes, unfortunately. Yes. Thank you. The microphone is quite sophisticated and it will pick up, even if you speak quite quietly.
Okay.
Thank you. So, can you see the last paragraph there, paragraph 44? And I'll read this out. It says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that was your understanding when you signed it, was it?
Yes.
And have you done your best in your statement to be as truthful and as accurate as you possibly can?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by asking you some questions about the 3rd of May 2015. So let's start at paragraph 2 of your inquiry statement, which is on page 1. And you'll see that on the screen some of the personal details have been blacked out, so they're not visible to everybody.
Okay.
But your copy, the details you gave us, are completely visible to you on the hard copy.
Yes.
So if you want to mention people's names, feel free to do so. That's completely up to you. Let's look at paragraph 2. And you were staying on the morning of Sunday the 3rd of May, you were staying at your mum's house. Is that correct?
Yes.
And who was there with you that day? Do you remember?
My mum, my disabled brother Abid, my son Rian, who's 1.5, and my daughter Safa, who was about 2 months at the time.
Thank you. And I understand that you had a baby not long prior to that.
That's right.
Do you want to tell us how old your baby was?
That was my 2-month-old baby, Safa. She had a hernia operation.
Were you looking after her?
I was looking after her, yes.
And was your mum looking after both of you at that
Yes.
time? And I think you were recovering from the birth at that time.
Yes, I had an emergency C-section.
And you've told us about your brother, Abid.
Yes.
Tell us about your brother.
He's disabled, as in he's paralysed. He's on a wheelchair. He needs full care. My mum looks after him all the time. He was a war veteran. He was injured in the Baghdad whilst on duty. One second.
And am I right in thinking that you've got other brothers as well?
I do, yes.
What are their names?
My oldest brother is Sajid, and my twin brother is Zahid.
He's your twin brother.
He's my twin brother, yes.
But they weren't at the house first in the morning.
No.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you about what was happening at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'll come back to your family in a moment. So you say in paragraph 2, if you can look at that, you'll see, so maybe before 8 o'clock, but I can't remember the exact time, and you mention other people being in the house, you saw 2 police officers in uniform walking about outside the house. Tell us what they were doing.
They were, well, what looked like to me, they were scanning the house, as in they were looking around, up and down, while they were walking towards the door.
Were they, when you say they were walking towards the door, can you describe where they were in the property?
This was at the back of the house, towards the kitchen, which is the back entrance to the house.
And you mentioned that they were in the back garden.
Yes.
And they were heading towards the back door, you said?
Yes, right.
How many officers were there?
At that time, there were 2 officers.
And tell us what happened at that stage.
They came and they had knocked on the door and they had asked about my brother Zahid and if he was home.
Who answered the door?
I did.
What did you say?
I told him that he wasn't home, that I hadn't seen him.
At that time, what explanation did the police officers give you for looking for your brother?
I don't remember.
And what did they do after you told them Zahid wasn't there?
They left.
Okay. Do you see where they went?
No.
If we can move on to another paragraph, please. If we could look at number 4. And you say there, around an hour's time, lots of officers came to the house. Can I ask, when you say around an hour's time, is that after about an hour, you mean? Or was it a shorter period than that?
I can't remember the exact time. It must have been about an hour, or maybe more than an hour. I'm not quite sure.
And when you say lots of officers came to the house, do you remember how many officers?
I couldn't count how many there were. There were just a lot.
Did you see any cars, police cars?
Not from where I was standing when I saw them.
Where were you standing?
I was slightly in the sitting room and in the kitchen. The sitting room is right next to the kitchen, so you could see outside the window.
Did you say a moment ago that's at the back of the house?
That's at the back of the house, yes.
Thank you. And what happened when you saw them that second time?
A second time, there was an officer that wasn't wearing a uniform banging on the door. And that's when I had opened it. I was quite frightened, scared. I didn't know what was happening.
You've said it was a non-uniformed officer.
That's right.
And he was banging on the door. Could you describe that officer, please?
He was quite tall, broad. I think he had some sort of facial hair.
How tall was he?
I don't know, taller than me. He must have been about maybe 6 foot, I'm not sure.
What height are you?
I'm 5'3".
And you've just said he had facial hair. Can
Yeah.
you describe that for me?
I can't remember, it was that long ago.
Who was he with?
He was with officers that were in uniforms.
How many?
I don't remember how many there were.
Who answered the door?
I did.
What did you say?
I can't remember what I said. I was actually quite scared and intimidated by the whole situation at the time. Frightened. I opened the door and he said that we needed to vacate the house.
Do you remember what words he used?
Not maybe in exact order, but that he was there for an investigation and they were looking for evidence and they had to search the house.
You've mentioned today and in your statement at paragraph 4, about 4 lines down from the top, that he told me we needed to vacate the property for an investigation.
That's right.
What explanation was given to you about why you needed to vacate the property?
No explanation.
What was your response when he told you this?
I asked for a warrant.
What was his reply?
He didn't have one.
Did he explain to you what his authority was for asking you to get out of the house?
No, that they just said that they had to search our house.
You said in your statement, a few more lines down, around halfway down here, he was very pushy, abrupt and quite rude. I felt really intimidated by him. I was frightened and scared and didn't know what to do. When you say he was very pushy, what do you mean?
He was just forceful.
In what way?
In a way that he didn't give me a chance to think about anything.
What was describe for me his body language or his demeanour?
I can't remember.
And you've said he was quite rude.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about his manner?
Wasn't very pleasant.
How was he not very pleasant?
I just
Sorry.
felt scared and intimidated by him.
What was his tone of voice like?
Aggressive, quite loud, a bit frightening.
And you say in your statement, I remember closing the door and he went away.
That's right.
I could see him walking round to the front of the house. Then he came back and there were more of them and he knocked again. Which door did he knock on this time?
The back door again?
So he came back to the back door?
Yes.
And you said, I opened the door. He was with another man in a suit who looked younger.
Yes.
Can you remember the younger man in a suit? Describe him for me, please.
He was quite skinny, a lot shorter. I can't remember if he had any facial hair or anything like that. I don't recall of that. I just remember he was quite young.
Okay. You say in your statement, they said they didn't need a warrant and that we had to vacate the house now. They said we didn't have a choice and had to let them in because this was a crime scene and they need to seal the house and they had to search the house.
Yes.
Was this the first time that they'd mentioned that your house was a crime scene?
Yes.
Was any explanation given to you about why your house was being treated as a crime scene?
No.
And you've said there they said we didn't have a choice.
Yes.
Did they explain why you didn't have a choice?
No.
And you said they need to seal the house and they had to search the house. Again, was there any explanation given to you about why they needed to do these things?
No.
After that was said, did you feel you had a choice?
No.
How confident are you in your recollection about these events, Mrs. Rashid?
It's not something that I can forget of how they made me feel, my family feel.
After the man had said these things to you, the officer, what did you do at that stage? Will we look at the next paragraph, Mrs. Rashid?
Yes.
Paragraph 5, and you'll see there that you say, I told them that we couldn't do that and that I had to speak to my dad as I have a disabled brother. I explained to them that he can't walk, he needs support to move around and get into a vehicle, and told them that I couldn't do that on my own because I was looking after my children and was not strong enough to do that. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? What explanation you gave to the police officers?
That's exactly what I told them.
Right. And is it correct that your brother has, is this Abid?
This is Abid, yes.
And he has difficulty walking. You said he was in a wheelchair.
He is paralysed.
And you said he needs support to move around. So even in the wheelchair, how does he get around?
My mum moves him around.
Is he able to move his wheelchair independently?
No. I would say he tries to, but he can't.
And describe the difficulties he has getting into a vehicle, for example.
He needs support. It's not something that a woman can do. It's not something that he can do on his own. He needs somebody there with him to put him into a vehicle.
When you say it's not something a woman can do, can you explain to the chair why?
Well, with myself, I had an operation, so it's not something that I can take, that I didn't have the strength to do it. He's a man. Do you know, a man can only be handled by a man or his carers.
Yeah. And presumably, had you been given certain advice by the hospital after your caesarean section?
Not to lift anything heavy, yes.
And were you observing that advice?
Yes.
And you said there, you told the police you couldn't do it on your own, and you were also looking after your children.
Yes.
And you've told us already about your baby and your young children. Let's look at the next paragraph. I'm interested in what the response from the police was when you told them that this wasn't something you could do yourself. Do you remember, or can you help us understand what their response was?
I felt like they didn't care.
Why do you say that? Well, you said there in paragraph 6, I remember when I said I had to contact my dad. And was that something you thought might help if you could speak to your dad?
Yes.
Does your dad help with Abid?
Yes, he's his full-time carer.
Right. And where was your dad at that time?
Probably, I think he was at the shop, his business.
We might hear that your dad works in a shop.
Yeah.
And you say there that they said, is that the police said they
Yes.
couldn't allow anyone into the house?
That's right.
Which of the officers said that to you?
The two officers that weren't in their uniform, they were wearing suits.
The two who'd come to the door?
Yeah.
And was it one of them that spoke, or were they both speaking?
I can't remember if both of them were speaking at the time or if it was just one.
And you've said there, I told them that I couldn't drive. And is that correct, Mrs. Rashid? You're not able to drive yourself at that time, on the 3rd of May?
No, I told them I couldn't drive my brother Abid. But I was able to drive, but it was very difficult driving.
Had you been given advice after your caesarean section about driving?
To be careful, not to do long distance.
And tell us about your mum. How able is your mum?
What do you mean by able?
Well, would she be able to help Abid?
No.
And
She was quite early. She's quite old, so it's not something that she can manage on her own.
Thank you. If we look at paragraph 7, and you'll have a copy of the statement in your folder, which isn't blanked out. So you've told the police some of the difficulties that you would have. You've told them you'd like to contact your dad. And I think in paragraph 7 you say, I told them I needed to phone my brother, but they told me I couldn't contact anyone. What assistance did the police offer you once you told them of the difficulties you would have?
Nothing.
Did they? Did they suggest any other officers could help?
No. I was
And-
made to feel that we had to do everything on our own. Without any help.
And in paragraph 7 you said, I said they had to allow me to contact somebody. I can't remember if they had come in or were still standing outside when I made a call to my dad, maybe about 9 in the morning. Can't remember the exact time. So you said the police told you you couldn't contact anyone, but you did phone your dad.
Yes.
And tell us about the call with your dad.
I told him that there was officers that have come to our house and they want to search our house and they're telling us to vacate it and that I needed help with Abid.
When you were making that call to your dad, where were you?
I can't remember where I was at the time. I think I was maybe in the kitchen or the sitting room.
What happened when you were on the phone to your dad?
Nothing at the time, I just made that call.
And after you called your dad, tell us what did your dad say? What was his response?
He asked why they were there. And I told him I didn't know.
What did he say about coming to give help to Abid?
I can't remember what he said, but he said he would come to the house.
How was your mum reacting to the police arriving in the house?
Terrified, scared. Kind of brought back memories to her from previous event that she had gone through with the police.
And how was Abid reacting to this?
I would say he was the same. Obviously, for him, it was like his day was being interrupted.
Can I look at paragraph 9, please? You say the tall officer forced himself into the house. He walked into the house pushing me towards the sitting room because as he walked towards me, I had to walk backwards. He came through the kitchen and stood in the sitting room. I was panicked at this stage. I was worried about the safety of my children, my disabled brother and my elderly mum. And then you were suffering at that time as well yourself.
That's right.
And you've used the words there that the tall officer forced himself into the house, and you said pushing me towards the sitting room. Could you give us a little bit more detail about what you mean?
He barged in.
Did he touch you?
No, because I was walking backwards at the time.
If you hadn't been walking backwards, would he have been able to get past you?
No, the space was quite tight, coming from the kitchen to the sitting room when this happened. And because he was quite broad.
When he barged in, where was your mum?
I'm not sure, but I think she may have been in the sitting room at the time.
Where was Abid at the time?
He was there as well.
With your mum in the sitting room? Or looking at paragraph 10, he said I couldn't contact anybody. I remember arguing with him, saying he has to allow me to phone my brother and dad at least to help me because I couldn't do anything on my own, nor could my elderly mum. And I think you mentioned carers there. You've mentioned carers already a moment ago. Does Abid have carers who come into the house?
Yes.
How many times a day do they come in?
Probably about 3 times a day.
Do they come in at roughly the same time every day?
Yes.
Is that 7 days a week?
7 days a week, yes.
And you said there that you thought the carers had been in to dress them already that morning.
Yes.
Do they come in early in the morning usually?
Quite early in the morning, yes.
And is that for the purpose of dressing him?
For dressing him, showering him, getting him ready for breakfast.
So had they been and gone by that time that morning?
I think they had been, yes.
Did the carers need to help Abid get dressed and showered?
It's not something that he could do on his own, yes.
Could we look at paragraph 11 now, please? I kept asking what this was about, but they said they couldn't disclose anything. The other officer came in and said they were looking for evidence. I asked what evidence. They didn't say anything, just that they were carrying out an investigation and looking for evidence, and this was a crime scene. And this is the point where they all start coming in. What information, if any, during that day were you given about the reason for the investigation that they were doing?
There was no reason given.
And what information were you given about it being a crime scene?
Nothing.
In paragraph 12, you mention that you had a mobile phone that was upstairs. You thought you could use it, but the police officer kept warning me to not make any outgoing calls. And you said you needed to gather your belongings. Tell us about the situation with your mobile phone.
It was upstairs in my mum's room where my children were.
And did you go upstairs at some point to get your mobile phone?
Yes, when I told the officer I needed to gather my belongings.
And which phone did you use to phone your dad?
That would have been my mum's house phone at the time, which was downstairs.
And which phone did you use to phone your brother?
I can't remember calling him or if he had called me, but it was my mobile phone.
And then in this paragraph, you've mentioned that you were needing to gather your belongings. Could you tell us what you wanted to collect? What belongings you wanted to take?
Clothes, my children's clothes, their nappies, everything that a child requires. Trying to get their medication. Basically toiletries, everything, because I didn't know how long we were going to be outside the house for.
What information were you given about how long this process would take?
We weren't told.
When you've mentioned medication, whose medication was it that you needed to collect?
My own and Safa's as well.
Your daughter?
My daughter Safa's 2 months, yes. And her bandages, she had dressing on for after her operation. They had chicken pox, so I had to make sure that they had the creams for that as well.
Mm-hmm. What about your mum? Did she have any belongings that she wanted to collect?
Yes, she had, again, it was her medication, her clothes, anything else that she wanted to take. Again, we didn't know how long we were going to be out of the house for, so it was just trying to just take anything that we would need for the full day.
Tell us what you would have needed to collect for Abid.
Abid is quite difficult to collect because everything that we have is in the house, is not something that we could remove from the house. So the only thing that we could take of his would be his clothes and things that he needed to use to go to the toilet.
What sort of things had to be left behind?
His equipment.
Could you tell us about his equipment?
It's like a machine that like lifts him out of his chair onto his bed.
Like a hoist?
Yes,
That had to be left behind.
that had to be left behind, yes.
What about his bed? Does he have any?
He has a special bed that's made for him.
And what is it about his bed that's different from an ordinary bed?
It's almost like a hospital bed, so it folds to a certain position that he sleeps and that he can rest in.
Right. And are there handrails or?
There's handrails, there's buttons on the side of the bed, so it's all adjusted according to his needs.
How would Abid get on if he was just sleeping in a normal bed?
He wouldn't cope.
Did you remember to pack everything that you needed?
No. We were rushed.
How much time did you have?
I can't remember how long we had. I just remember we were just being pushed and forced, and we were in a panic mode.
What sort of things were left behind?
I was nursing my baby at the time, so I had left my pumps behind, my express milk, and I think I can't remember what else I had forgotten. It was some medication. My mum's didn't manage to take all our medication because we didn't know how long we were going to be out of the house for.
When you realised you'd left things in the house, what arrangements could you make to get back in to get things?
We weren't allowed to go back inside.
Who said you weren't allowed to go back?
The officer did.
Which officer?
The ones in the uniform. No, they both did.
The uniformed officers?
Yes. The ununiformed officer.
Oh, sorry, ununiformed.
Yes.
Are these the ones that you'd spoken about earlier?
Yes.
Did you explain, what explanation did you give them about the medication, breast pumps, express milk?
They didn't care. They just said we weren't allowed back in the house and we weren't allowed to touch anything.
Did you tell them that you needed
Yes.
things? Did you tell them what things you needed?
Yes.
Did they offer to go and get things for you?
Nothing. Can I take a little break?
Yes. We'll have a break at this point.
Yes.
Yes, Miss Graham.
Thank you. Mrs. Rashid, I think I'll have a look now, if I may, at paragraphs 13 and 14.
Yes.
And you'll see those in your hard copy in the folder. So if you just have a look at those. And just a couple of things I want to ask you about these paragraphs. You've said that at this point there were police officers upstairs looking into each room. They wouldn't let me see what they were doing. And then you mention in paragraph 14 they had gloves on, so I knew they were looking for something. Can you tell the chair a little bit more about what was going on up the stairs?
I'm actually not so sure myself. All I know that they were looking in each room, the bedrooms that are upstairs of our house.
And that's where your children were?
Yes.
And did they explain to you at all why they were wearing gloves?
No.
Was anyone wearing white suits?
No.
No. Let's move on to paragraph 15. You say there were lots of them, but they were not all inside yet. And you talk in this paragraph about calling your brother. You
I can't
mentioned that
remember
earlier.
that if I had called him or if he had called me. But yes, I spoke to him.
And I think he asked if they had a warrant. I told him no. And he said the police can't come in the house without a warrant and consent. I told them they have forced their way in and are looking around. And I was still on the phone with him when the tall police officer grabbed my phone and disconnected it. Could you tell us what happened?
I was in the middle of having a conversation with him, and I think he came up behind me and he just took my phone off of me and cut the call. So I couldn't finish off what I was telling my brother.
What did he say to you, the police officer?
Nothing, that I couldn't contact anyone.
And when you say the tall police officer, is this a reference to the one you've described to us earlier?
Yes, that's right.
The one who was at the door
Yes.
first. What did you do?
I didn't know what to do. I was terrified.
And then you say in paragraph 16, if we look at that, the officer looked at it to see who I was phoning when it was disconnected. The tall officer listened to the whole call before grabbing it off me. What do you mean by that?
He was hovering around me. So he had heard me talking.
Were you aware that he was in your vicinity when you were on the phone?
He was around me, as in he was watching every movement of me and what I was doing.
Where were you when you were making that call?
I think I can't remember if I was in my mum's room at the time or if I was in the hallway.
Where was he when you were making the call?
Around me. He was just watching everything that I was doing.
Right. And then you say he started to scroll through my phone. I asked for my phone back. I had to repeat this 3 or 4 times before he gave it back to me. And did he ultimately give you your phone back?
After I practically begged him for it.
And then you say at this point, I felt like he was treating me like a criminal who had something to hide.
That's right.
Is that how you were feeling?
That is exactly how he made me feel.
And then you say at paragraph 17, I can't recall if I spoke to anyone else on the phone other than my dad and brother. I think I tried to call Zahid, but I can't remember if I spoke to him. After the police officer had taken your phone off you, did you try to make any other calls?
I was too scared to.
And then paragraph 18, let's look at that paragraph now. It's on the next page. You say here, They wouldn't let us touch anything. I told the police I needed to gather some belongings. My baby was in my mum's room. I had to get changed and clothed. So there seems to be a D missing there from clothed, and asked the officer to let me have some privacy. Tell us about this. They wouldn't let you touch anything and you had to ask for some privacy.
I wasn't allowed to go into any rooms. I wasn't allowed to touch anything apart from my own belongings that were in the room at the time, where my children were.
How was it the police stopped you from touching things?
They just said I couldn't go or touch anything, that was it.
And you've said you asked the officer to let me have some privacy. Explain what that was about.
I was in my pyjamas, so I wanted to change because I didn't want to leave the house with my pyjamas on. And I wear hijab, so I didn't want him to be there, so I needed some privacy, to change my clothes and get my children ready.
Was the officer willing to give you some privacy?
He did at that point, yes.
And were you able to change in one of the rooms in private?
Yes.
What did the officer do when you were left in the room in private to get changed?
He stood outside the room.
Did he ask you if that was okay? Did he ask for your permission to do that?
To stand outside the room. He didn't ask for my permission, I had to ask him.
How did you feel having an officer standing outside your room?
Terrified, scared.
And it was a male police officer?
Yes.
Was there a female police officer
No.
present that you were aware of?
No.
Let's look at paragraph 20 now. You talk about when you were upstairs, your dad arrived because you could hear him arguing. Tell us what happened when your dad arrived.
I just heard him arguing outside with the officers to allow him to come inside. And they kept saying that he wasn't allowed inside.
Were you able to hear that from upstairs?
I could hear that because where my mum's room is above the sitting room, and it's to the back of the garden where the officers were, and we normally use that as a main entrance to come into the house.
So would your dad have used the back door to
Yes.
get into the house?
Yeah.
And if we look at paragraph 22, you then say that you were downstairs. I kept telling them we couldn't leave until either my brother came in or we came to some sort of arrangement. What sort of arrangement are you talking about there? So you've talked about being downstairs.
That's right.
And you kept telling them you couldn't leave until either your brother came in and took your brother out.
Because it's
Or-
not something I could do myself. Only they were able to handle my brother Abid.
So did your dad and your other brother arrive together, or is it round
No,
about
I think my dad arrived first and then my older brother arrived afterwards.
How long was your dad kept out of the house?
For quite some time.
Do you have any recollection?
For how long? No, I was too busy trying to get my kids ready, myself ready. I was panicking.
You say in paragraph 22, they wouldn't budge and were quite rude, abrupt and intimidating. Is that how you felt that day?
That's right.
I remember saying we didn't have anywhere to go and asking if they could search the house whilst we stayed in one room. Was that something that you suggested?
That is something I suggested, yes, because I was worried about the safety of my brother and
Is that Abid?
Abid, and where he was going to go. Everything that we needed was in that house. Is catered for him. He can't cope going anywhere else. That's why I asked if we could just stay in one room while we searched the rest of the house.
What was the response to that?
They didn't care, and they said that we have to arrange our own accommodation or go to a family member's house.
Right. And as well as Abid's situation, how would it have helped you and your family to remain within the house, maybe within one room of the house?
The fact that we were still in our surroundings and he's still in his surroundings.
Thank you. If we have a look now, please, at paragraph 23, the next paragraph. You said, the police said, we couldn't do that, and whether we went to a hotel or a relative's house was up to us.
That's right.
They said they didn't know how long it would take. I remember asking what they were looking for and them saying they couldn't disclose that. They continued telling us we had to leave or they would force us out. They said they would have no choice but to remove us from the house. When you say they would force us out, did they explain what they would do?
They would basically just tell us, move us out of the house forcefully.
What was your view at that time about this suggestion that you go to a hotel or a relative's house?
Again, I explained to the police officer that going to a hotel or a relative's house is not, we can't handle Abid there. He needs his surroundings. He needs everything that he needs is in that house. He can't cope being anywhere else.
You explained that to the police?
Yes.
Again, did that make any difference?
They didn't know. They didn't care. They didn't have any compassion. They didn't care how he was. They didn't care how I was. My mum. They just didn't care about the whole situation of how we were going to manage being outside that house.
And looking at the next paragraph, 24, you say you can't recall having had breakfast or anything to eat. Was there any arrangements made with the police about making sure everyone had had breakfast?
Nothing at all.
Or any refreshments?
No.
Now, you've been very careful to say you don't remember exact timings of things already today. Is it possible that this was all happening slightly later in the day?
I don't recall. I just remember it was sometime in the morning.
Right. That's your best recollection?
Yes.
Thank you. In paragraph 24, you mention in the first sort of line, they were just trying to get us out as fast as possible. Was that your impression on the day that...
That's right.
Was there any accommodation made to give you a little bit more time?
No.
And then in the same paragraph, I think you say, my dad eventually came inside and I think he took Abid out of the house in his wheelchair.
That's right.
And that you left through the kitchen door with your belongings and your children. And what did your mum do?
My mum went with Abid She went with Abid, and she went with my brother, my older brother Sajid. He took them away, so she went along with Abid.
And at the end, oh sorry.
Sorry.
You say at the end, I put the stuff in my car, and while I was still parked, the police searched my car.
They did.
Tell us what happened.
They looked him up. They looked in my boot. They looked at the back of the car.
Was there any explanation given
No.
to you?
I was made to feel like a criminal at this point. Like I had something to hide.
And then I think at paragraph 25, you maybe touched on this earlier today. That you explained that you'd forgotten some of the things. So if you're looking at the hard copy, you'll see that's on the next page. So you forgot some things and you weren't allowed back in the house. And I think you told us earlier about asking for
That's
those
right.
things. And can I ask you about paragraphs 26 and 27, please? You've talked about there being officers outside the house as well as inside. And you saw Zahid sitting in another car. Is that your other brother?
That's my twin brother.
Your twin brother? And it wasn't a police car, and you don't remember what time of day this was?
No.
Is it possible that that could have been later in the afternoon, or? You've mentioned there morning, or if this was at night.
Because that's the only 2 times that we were there at the house. We weren't there in the afternoon.
Right. So you were there in the morning when the police first arrived.
That's right.
And then you returned in the evening later.
Late in the evening.
So you can't remember which occasion you saw your brother, your twin brother.
I just remember seeing him, but I just don't recall what time it was. That memory's a bit vague.
That's absolutely fine. But on the occasion, whenever it was that you saw your twin brother, you say in paragraph 27, my brother or dad went over to the car Zahid was in. That's your other brother went over with your dad.
My older brother, yes.
Your older brother. But the police wouldn't let them talk to him. It was really scary and confusing. They were not clear about why they were raiding our house.
That's right.
And when you say the police wouldn't let them, your older brother and your dad talk to your twin brother, tell us what was happening when that was going on.
I was sitting in my car at the time. I just remember Zahid just sitting in the car and they weren't allowed to speak to him, so he was kept in the car.
And paragraph 28 says, it felt like they were trying to look for something in the house. Nothing made sense as to why we were removed from our house. We were made to feel like criminals with no rights. We were treated like second-class citizens. We felt vulnerable and victimised. And looking back now, you've described how you felt that day. What long-term impact has this had on you, Mrs. Rashid?
The fact that we're not safe around the police anymore.
Yeah.
The fact that, never mind being out in the streets, as you can see, I'm a Muslim wearing a hijab, don't feel safe as it is. Don't feel safe in our own homes anymore.
Can I move on and ask you about the remainder of your
Yes.
statement? So let's look now at paragraphs 29 and 30, please. And 29, you say you asked officers how long you'd be out of the house for, and you talk about your mum needing her things and her medication, and I think your brother needed his equipment. You've told us about that earlier.
That's right.
And you say there he has his carers who come in at set times. Why was that a concern?
Because nobody else could handle him. And that is their routine, that's his routine, that's his set routine every day.
Were you concerned if Abid left the house that would be disrupted?
It would have disrupted his routine, yes.
Can you tell us, if Abid's routine is disrupted, what effect that has on him?
His mental health, his physical health. He doesn't like, first of all, he doesn't like being moved away from his comfort zone. Everything that he needs is there. So he cannot be handled anywhere else.
And when Abid was out of the house that day,
Mm-hmm.
did you spend time with him? Do you know how he was during that day?
He struggled.
In what way? Can you help us?
He was sitting in his chair practically the whole day. He didn't have the facilities that he needed. He didn't have his bathroom, his toilet that he could use comfortably.
And what effect does it have if he has to sit in his chair all day?
He normally takes a little bit of rest from his chair. He gets some exercise done with the help of my dad. Stretching, and sometimes maybe sitting on the couch or his special chair that's actually made for him.
Where was the special chair?
In his bedroom.
Back at home?
Back at home, yeah.
We were going to look at... so I'll move on from here. Did the police say anything about when Abid would be able to get back into the house?
They never said anything about anyone.
Did the police ever ask about whether he would need any additional support in order to stay away from the house?
Nothing was mentioned.
If you were planning to have Abid out of the house for any length of time, what sort of arrangements would typically have to be made?
My dad and my brother would have to be there. And it's normally, if it is, it's normally like a really short period of time. He doesn't like being moved. He just doesn't like being moved at all. Normally, anything that would happen or any occasion, it's always in my mum's house because that's his comfort zone.
When you say a really short period of time, could you help us understand what you mean?
Probably about maybe half an hour, an hour.
Okay. How often is Abid out of the house, out of his comfort?
Not a lot. I've hardly ever seen him out of that house.
Does he attend medical appointments?
With my dad, yes, he would.
Apart from medical appointments, how often would he be out of the house?
Never.
When Abid was out of the house that day, what happened with his carers? You've described to us they came in 3 times a day. You've said in the morning and at night, and there'd be an appointment during the day. What happened to that appointment?
With the carers?
Did the carers come to the house?
I can't recall if they had came and just left.
Okay. Can I look at paragraphs 31, 2 and 3, please? We might not get them. Oh, we will. So you've told us here about staying out of the house for the rest of the day. We stayed there for the rest of the day. We were at my brother's house until after 9 or 10 at night. So was that the remainder of the day you remained at your older brother's?
That's
Is that
right.
right? And you talk in paragraph 32 about everything you needed was at your mum's and you forgot to take things. Can you tell us the sort of things you forgot? I think you mentioned it earlier.
I was nursing my daughter at the time, so I had forgotten my breast pumps because she was quite difficult to feed at the time because of her condition. I forgot her creams, her bandages, my own medication.
Right. And then in paragraph 34, you say, at this point, news of Sheikh had spread all over town. Was this during the course of that day?
That was during the course of the time that we were at my brother's house.
Yeah. And you say there, we could not understand why our house was a crime scene. What evidence were they looking for and why we were being treated as criminals? Why was that something you struggled to understand?
What did Sheikh death had to do with our house? Why were we being thrown out of our house? What were they looking for in our house? What were they searching for that could possibly to do with Sheikh's death?
We've not heard any evidence in this inquiry that would indicate that Sheikh had been in your house that day. Was there anything you were aware of that would connect him to your house?
No?
Can we look at paragraphs 35 and 36? You talk about going back to the house, and you say that when you got back, you waited outside for nearly an hour, and there were police officers there at that time, and that might have been when you saw your twin brother in the car. Was an explanation given to you as to why you had to wait nearly an hour?
They were still inside the house.
The police were.
They were still inside the house, yes.
Did they explain what they were doing in the house?
They were still searching.
Right. What did your dad do at that time?
He was arguing with the police officers to allow us back in our own accommodation.
And when you were waiting, where was Abid?
Abid was still sitting in the car.
And then you finally got back into the house that evening.
That's right.
How were you feeling at that time?
Made to feel like criminals. That we had something to hide.
Can I ask if we can look at the next paragraph, please? Now, I think we can only see part of this. I'd like to see, it covers 2 pages. And I think it may be easier for you if you look at your hard copy. So look at the paper copy that you have in front of you of paragraph 37, which is at the bottom of page 7. And here I think you tell us a little. I said earlier I'd come back to your brother Abid, and I think there's things that you think might help the chair understand about Abid. You mentioned earlier that he'd been in the army.
That's right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
He was about 18 when he had joined the army. He was a paratrooper, Regiment 1, and he was injured while serving this country. He was in Baghdad at the time, and he suffered lifelong injuries. Basically, he was paralysed from neck down.
And you say in this paragraph that this is a lifelong disability.
That's right.
And you also mentioned that, understandably, he has mental health difficulties as well.
He was brain damaged.
Right. And that's something that your family are dealing with and caring
Yes.
for him.
We've been caring for him for a very long time, ever since his accident happened.
And I think at the end of that paragraph, if you look at that paragraph, you say it happened in around 2002, 2003,
That's right.
and the consequences have been severe for Abid.
That's right.
Thank you. Can I ask you about paragraph 38, please? And you say there was no compassion for him. Is that Abid that you're talking about?
That's right, yes.
No dignity or care. He deserved better treatment, and we deserved better treatment. Instead, we were all treated like we did something wrong, like we were criminals. I hate to think what would have happened if I wasn't there, because my poor mother doesn't speak English, and no doubt you're talking there about your brother Abid.
That's right.
Does he have difficulty communicating?
He does, yes.
Now, your English is obviously excellent. Tell us about your mother's English.
My mum doesn't speak English.
So if your mum has to come into contact with anyone who only speaks English, who translates for her?
If I'm there, then I would. Or she tries to use hand gestures to try and speak English. It's not very clear.
On that day, the 3rd of May, how did the police communicate with your mother?
They didn't. I had to translate everything to her. She just knew something was going on and she was scared.
On that day, were any questions asked by any of the officers about what language your mother spoke?
No,
Was any offer made to bring in an interpreter?
nothing.
Did they offer to use a telephone interpreting service?
Nothing at all.
Looking back now, how do you feel about the way that you and your family were treated that day?
Like second-class citizens?
Could you help the chair with something, Mrs. Rashid? Could you think back to that day and tell us how that whole experience could have been improved by the police?
And they treated us with a bit of respect.
What would you have found to have been of benefit to make the situation better?
If they hadn't removed us from our own home.
And if it was necessary for the police to do that on that day, what could they have done to make the situation better for you and your family?
Not to make us feel threatened, unsafe.
Is there a way they could have done that?
I'm not sure.
Thank you. And then in paragraph 39, you say you've had no further contact with the police since that day. And as I understand it, certainly the inquiry doesn't have any statement that was taken by PERC from you, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner. Did they ever come to you and ask you to give a statement?
No.
So is the first involvement since the 3rd of May 2015 really when the inquiry got in touch with you?
No.
Was that the first time you were asked to give a statement about these events?
This was the first time I was asked to give a statement.
That was from the inquiry?
Yes.
Thank you. And then I think in paragraph 40, you describe you remembering the police officers were so rude, they were intimidating and aggressive, and that you were crying and you didn't know what to do because you were scared and terrified. Was it, and you talk about your children being distressed, was it apparent that you were crying and upset and your children were distressed? Would the police have realised that?
I don't think they really cared how I was feeling.
And then you say you came to your mother's house to rest, and you've told us about your surgery after the baby, and instead found myself in a traumatic nightmare experience that was uncalled for. And did you feel the whole experience was uncalled for?
It was.
And then at the end, you say at paragraph 41, you didn't want to move your baby around. She was very unsettled. And the police were checking everything. It was really distressing. Tell us what the impact it had on your baby.
Well, she was just recovering from a hernia operation, so moving her about. I had everything at my mum's house. I didn't have it anywhere else, so I couldn't really move her about too much. She had stitches, so I didn't want her to. I couldn't keep her in a chair, or couldn't keep her anywhere else. She was crying quite a lot.
And then at paragraph 42, you say they were uncaring, and I felt almost like we were being treated differently because we were Pakistani and Muslims. When you say that in your inquiry statement, can you tell us what was it about what the officers did or said that made you feel this way?
The fact that we were Muslims and wearing a hijab, we were quite vulnerable at the time. Had that been anyone else, they would have been treated differently.
How do you think they would have treated you differently? In what way would they have treated you differently, do you think?
By caring about our situation, being a bit more compassionate towards us, about my brother's situation, understanding what we were going through. But they didn't care about anything at all.
There's two things I'd like to ask you about, and then that's me completely finished. The first is we're in the process, as you know, as an inquiry of gathering in statements, and that's not something we can do overnight. So we're still waiting. We're going to get inquiry statements from some of the officers who were in the house that day. Obviously, you haven't been able to tell us names or details, but that's something we're going to do. I do know that one officer was there, and I'd like to just mention what briefly he says.
Okay.
Now, this is PERC 00145, and I don't need to have that on the screen at this stage, but it's a statement from an officer called DC Kevin Petrie, and he talks about clearing the property and securing it. And this proved particularly problematic due to there being small children and a disabled man within. So that's your house. And he mentions going back to Leavenmouth Police Station, where we had to make several phone calls to family members of your dad around the care of the disabled man. And we also had to contact the social work regarding this. And I just wondered if you were aware at all of any contact being made with the social work department that day.
I don't know.
You don't know. Were you contacted by the police about anything to do with that?
Myself, no.
Thank you. Now, there was something you mentioned earlier in your evidence, and I don't need to take details from you.
Okay.
I just want to ask you a couple of things, if you can confirm them. When you were speaking earlier, you might remember I asked you how your mum reacted that day. And one of the things that you said was it kind of brought back memories to her from a previous event she'd gone through with the police. Now, I don't need any details, but can I just confirm with you, That had nothing whatsoever to do with Sheku Bayo. Is that correct? That was not a
No.
There was no connection with Mr. Bayo.
No.
And your mum's involvement would have only been in connection as a potential witness for the police to speak to. That was the only reason that your mum would have been involved with the police previously. So you said that it brought back memories for your mum, but her involvement would only have been as a possible witness.
That's right, yeah.
There's no suggestion, I want to make it clear, there's no suggestion of any criminality on the part of your mum that she would have been involved with the police before.
That's right, yeah.
And that there was never any criminal charges brought against your mum or people in your family because of that previous event.
That's right, yeah.
I just want to make that absolutely clear. Thank you for confirming. Could you give me one moment?
Sure.
I've been asked to just confirm one other thing, sorry. Okay. You talked about the police looking in the boot of your car. And was the boot already open when they looked in?
I can't remember.
Did the police, when they looked in your car, did they touch anything?
I can't recall.
Thank you very much. I've got no further questions at the moment.
Are there any Rule 9 applications? No. Well, Mrs. Rashid, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. I'm going to adjourn now and you'll be free to go. I'm going to stop for a slightly early lunch, so we'll sit again at 1:55.